The title of this presentation is New Local Pseudopotential for Multilayer Carbon Materials. I am from the Energy Research Institute, Budapest. The outline of the presentation is as follows. First, we will talk a little bit about the wave packet dynamics because we are going to use the potential in such calculations. Then we present some different pseudopotential constructions, from the simplest to the present advanced pseudopotential. We present how to verify the pseudopotential for different multi-layer graphene band structures, and then we give a little insight into what it is used for. But we will elaborate this in the next lecture. This presentation is based on a research paper, which was recently published in the journal Carbon Trends. The title of this paper is New Local Pseudopotential for Multilayer Carbon Materials and its Application in Wave Packet Dynamics. This work was performed in Hungarian-Belgian cooperation, which has been existing for more than 25 years. The work was supported by the Graphene Flagship Program of the EU. Wave packet dynamics is actually a scattering experiment in the computer. We have an incoming wave packet, and we have a system, a black box, on which it is scattered, and then we have a scattered wave packet. The wave packet can be scattered in different directions, with different amplitudes and phases. We symbolized this with arrows of different thicknesses and directions. The two input parameters, initial conditions, are the initial wave function and the potential, which describes the system. Then the magics of the wave packet dynamics provides the time-dependent wave function. We can then calculate everything from the time-dependent wave function, since it represents the state of the system, which is why it is called a state function. We can, for example, calculate the probability density, the probability current density, and various eigenenergies and eigenfunctions. But how do we determine what is the initial wave packet and what is the potential describing the system? Different levels of approximations are used to determine the pseudopotential describing a given physical system. The first approximation, what we present on this slide, is the so-called Jellium approximation. We used it, for example, in this 2004 paper to model scanning tunneling microscopy (STM) imaging of carbon nanotubes. Here we see a sketch of the tunneling microscope. We have some sample, and we have a pointed needle that ideally has only one atom at the apex. We can move this tip very finely in 3 dimensions. An electric potential is connected between the tip and the sample, and then we measure the current. Though the tip is not touching the sample surface, just approaching it, still an electrical current flows between them, thanks to the quantum mechanical tunneling effect. Then we scan with the tip and thus map the sample surface. In the Jellium potential approximation, we say that the positive charges are distributed continuously inside the electrodes, the tip, sample, and support surface, and so are the negative charges. But the negative charges stick out a little from the geometrical contour of the electrodes. Here we have modeled the scanning tunneling microscopy imaging of a carbon nanotube. The tip was modeled with a rotational hyperboloid, the support surface with a semi-infinite plane, and the nanotube itself with a cylinder with a finite thickness. This is the model geometry. The Jellium potential is very simple. It only describes that the electron can freely move inside the electrodes, the tip, the nanotube, and the support surface. But it is bound in the electrodes. It needs an amount of energy to move the electron out into the vacuum. That amount of energy is called the work function. Here, the black is the vacuum, the blue is the metal. The potential is 0 in the vacuum, and minus 9.81 electron volts inside the metal. This value roughly corresponds to the sum of the Fermi energy and work function of the given metal. With the help of this potential, we calculate the time development of an electronic wave packet, starting from the bulk of the tip. But since the wave function itself is a complex quantity, we will rather display the probability density function with three-dimensional isosurfaces. So, we represent the wave packet time development with the time development of a surface, where the probability density is constant. Our electron starts from the tip. The initial wave packet is a three-dimensional Gaussian function, hence the constant density surface is spherical. We display only that part of this surface, which is inside the 3D display window. Here, on the left and right panes, we show the XZ and YZ cross-sections of the 3D probability density utilizing a color scale. So, our electron starts from the tip, flows around the nanotube, and finally penetrates the support surface. As a summary, the Jellium potential can perfectly describe the geometrical aspects of the tunneling process. The next level of approximation is the graphene pseudopotential, which already includes the atomic structure and the electronic structure. In the scanning tunneling microscope imaging simulation, the tip, which is a metal, was characterized with a Jellium potential, as in the previous approximation, but the graphene surface already modeled with an atomic potential. Here, you can see the line cut of the potential. There is a strong negative value at the carbon atomic sites, a positive value at the center of the hexagons, and a small potential peak at the carbon-carbon bonds. How do we calculate this pseudopotential? The functional form of the pseudopotential is the sum of three Gaussian functions centered on each of the atoms. So, we consider 6-parameter potentials and do a band structure calculation, which yields the energy bands, the dependence of the energy on the Blah wave number. This is the dispersion relation. So, our band structure also has 6 parameters, and in the end, we have to find a parameter set where the band structure calculated from the pseudopotential best approximates the real, in this case, the tight binding band structure. The delta difference between the two energy values is minimized using the Monte Carlo technique. In our case, the graphene band structure is our goal. We have a valence band and a conduction band in graphene. In this figure, we compare the real and approximated band structures. The solid line is the tight binding band structure, and the dashed line is the variationally calculated band structure. We can see a suitable match between the two. This pseudopotential nicely describes the band structure of graphene. Since graphene is a periodic two-dimensional crystal, the Bloch theorem also applies to it. So the phi wave functions are given as a product of a plane wave part and a lattice periodic part. Here we plot how these parts look like for different wave numbers. At the k point, this is the plane wave part, this is the UF function, which is lattice periodic, and this is the phi wave function itself. The graphene pseudopotential has been used in many different systems over the years. For example, we investigated the anisotropic propagation of the wave packet on graphene. Here you can see the three-dimensional model, and here we see the propagation of the wave packet at different times, 1.2 femtoseconds, 2.4 femtoseconds, and 4.2 femtoseconds. On the left, we see an XZ cross-section perpendicular to the graphene surface, and on the right, an XY cross-section in the graphene plane. We can see that the wave packet first tunnels onto the graphene. Then it starts to propagate along a hexagonal pattern. This propagation first goes along the bonds. It is very interesting that at first, when the wave packet sees only a small part of the graphene, a carbon cluster, below the STM tip, it does not perceive the band structure, but only begins to sense it when it has spread to a larger area. Then, however, the propagation direction changes. The wave packet propagates in the directions corresponding to the band structure anisotropically, as shown in this paper. The next interesting application is for the so-called graphene grain boundaries. Here we see different graphene grain boundaries, from ordered to completely disordered. We also investigated this system in STM geometry. Here, the wave packet tunnels onto the graphene from the STM tip, then reaches the grain boundary and is refracted and reflected there. It's like refraction and reflection of light on a boundary of two materials. At another energy, we see localized states at the grain boundary. The third example is a science article. Here, our Russian colleagues investigated the propagation of a wave packet in a nanotube transistor. Here we see the snapshots of the wave packet propagation at different times. So, we have seen that this second-level approximation of the pseudopotential is very good for planar graphene systems, where the atoms are sp2 bonded. But there is a problem with it. What is this problem? The problem is that it is only good for single layer, but bad for multilayer. Graphene occurs in different forms. First of all, there is the monolayer, which is truly one atomic layer. Then there are the few-layer, multilayer, and infinite-layer structures that is already the graphite. It turned out that our potential in the second approximation was very good for the monolayer, but when we tried it to more than one layer, it was quite bad. This is because this potential does not describe the interaction between layers well. Here we can see the band structure. These are the important points, the gamma point, K point, and M point. However, if we leave the Kz equals 0 plane and examine the Kh band, we see a flat band there, which means that the energy does not depend on the Z component of the wave number. This is not the case in reality, so there is a problem with the potential. If we want to create a graphene pseudopotential that describes the multilayer well, then we have to examine what is wrong with the old potential. It turns out that it only describes sigma states well. However, it doesn't describe the p states correctly. Let's just look at the wave functions themselves. With the help of the Webb-Shear-Dinger program, which can be found on our website, www.nanotechnology.hu, we performed a simple calculation for a toy model. We took two pairs of potential wells. The two horizontally positioned potential wells represent the graphene layer, and there are two such layers in our toy model. The distance of the wells within the layer is small, but the distance between the layers is large, like in graphite and other van der Waals layered materials. Here are the first few bound states of this potential. These are sigma states, so the probability of finding the electron is the highest in the graphene plane, and these are pi states, where the probability density is 0 on the graphene plane. The maximum of probability density is located below and above the plane. The coupling between the layers is small in the case of sigma states, but it is significant in the case of pi states, because the pi states have a larger extension in the z direction. In the case of the old potential, we used only the first two bands in the fitting procedure, which are sigma bands. We fitted those to the tight binding pi bands of graphene. As a result of this procedure, the eigenstates, the band energies, are good, but the eigenvectors, the orbitals, are not correct. That's the problem with the graphene pseudopotential. This is the third approximation of the potential, which already correctly describes the electronic structure of multilayer graphene stacks. On this slide, we present the construction and verification of the potential. The most important difference is that in the case of the old potential we had sigma states, but now we calculate for pi states. In addition, we made two other minor modifications. On the one hand, the potential will be more accurate, because instead using 3 Gaussians, we now use 4 Gaussians. Also, the old potential was isotropic, but now it will be anisotropic. This is achieved by using different parameters in the x-y plane and in z. So, we have a total of 12 parameters now instead of 6. We perform the optimization using the variational method. Here we show the result applied to a single carbon atom. This is what the in-plane potential looks like, and this is how the potential perpendicular to the plane looks like. Figures B and C show that our goal has been fulfilled with this new potential. On the one hand, it really reproduces the band structure. In the graphene band structure, we see here the linear crossing of the two bands at point K. And in figure C, we see the orbitals themselves, the wave functions. It can be seen that these orbitals are really pi states. The probability density is 0 in the plane of the graphene. The maxima are located below and above the plane of the graphene. Green is the positive part of the wave function, red the negative part. The maximum of the wave function is approximately 0.07 nanometer above the graphene, as proven by ab initio calculations. We are going to apply the new pseudopotential to multilayer graphene. But first, a few words about what graphene is. Graphene is known to every child who has ever written with a pencil or drawn with charcoal. Graphite is a layered material. Within the layers, there is a strong covalent bond between the atoms, but between the layers, there is only a weak van der Waals bond. Therefore, the layers can easily get peeled off when the pencil is dragged across the paper. In this case, graphene layers come off, and this is actually how we write with the pencil. These two Manchester researchers received the Nobel Prize in 2010 for the production of graphene. The properties of multilayer graphene depend on how the layers are offset from each other. Different layer offsets are presented here. In the case of A stacking, the atoms of all the layers are below the other. In the case of a B stacking, every second layer, the B layers, are offset compared to the A layers. In the case of ABC, we have 3 layers with a gradual shift, and in the turbostratic case, we are talking about random layer shifts. It is interesting to note that this is how the diffraction pattern changes with random layer shifts. If the layers are completely under each other, we have a diffraction image consisting of discrete peaks. But the peaks are broadened horizontally with randomizing the stacking, and we get vertical lines if we shift the layers randomly relative to each other. The periodicity in z direction is different in the AAE, AB, and ABC cases. In the case of AA stacking, if the layers are under each other, the periodicity of the crystal structure in the z direction is equal to the layer spacing C. In the case of a B stacking, every second layer is the same. So here the periodicity is 2C, and in the case of ABC, it is already 3C. In the turbostratic case, we can speak of a non-periodic system. The Z periodicity is infinite. Using our pseudopotential, we examined the electronic band structures of various typical graphene and graphite structures. The first row shows bilayer and trilayer graphene structures, and these are infinite layer systems with the same stackings. The figures show the band structure of these graphene systems in the vicinity of the K-point. These results agree nicely with those seen in the literature, where the band structures of these systems were calculated using density functional methods. And here we examined how the band structure of graphite infinite graphene layers depends on the Z component of the wave number vector. The periodicity is different in the three cases: C for AA graphene, 2C for Bernal graphene, and 3C for ABC graphene. Here we have depicted the change of the band structure in the three cases. We can observe that the shift of the energy value at the K-point decreases with increasing periodicity. Here, the KH band structure is shown in the AA and AB cases if we go perpendicular to the plane of the graphene. This also matches nicely with what we can see in the DFT calculations. So, finally, we can conclude that our newest pseudopotential can describe multilayer graphite and graphene very well. This figure proves that the new pseudopotential even describes the effect of the electric field nicely. Here we see tri-layer ABC graphene, to which we applied a perpendicular electric field. And here we show how the band structure changes. The solid line is when there is no electric field, and the dashed line is when there is an electric field. You can see that a forbidden band, a gap, is opening. The magnitude of the electric field is 0.2 volts between A and C, which are the two extreme layers. This slide shows how we apply the new pseudopotential to model multilayer graphene systems. In these multilayer graphene systems, we can change the number, offset, and rotation of the graphene layers, and we can also introduce defects. Technically, what we do is that we start the wave packet from a single-layer graphene surface, and it flows into the multilayer region. Then we examine how the wave packet behaves there. We will talk about this in more detail in the second part of this presentation. On this slide, we showed what happens when we apply our new pseudopotential for a two-layer graphene wave packet dynamics. Basically, what happens is that the wave packet bounces between the two layers, as this figure schematical shows, but it is very interesting that the details depend on the stacking. We will examine in detail the propagation of the wave packet on 2 and 3 layer graphene and analyze how the wave packet bounces between the layers. Then we are going to study a classical mechanical analogy for the case of 2 and 3 layers, utilizing 2 and 3 coupled pendulums. The wave packet dynamical method enables us to manage large systems consisting of a few thousand atoms, even on a laptop. This is especially important for problems that cannot be handled by the DFT method, such as small angle rotations. We can further speed up the calculation if we use a graphics card instead of a CPU. In the future, we also plan to investigate magnetic and correlation effects. In the long run, we would like to generalize our method to heterostructures, consisting not only graphene sheets, but all kinds of other two-dimensional materials. These are very interesting because the individual layers can all have different properties. For example, conducting, insulating, semiconducting, and thus we can build many different material systems. So, we were able to create a pseudopotential that can nicely describe the band structure of multilayer graphene and graphite systems. Thank you for your attention.